As Maya settled in, her eyes scanned the cabin, noting the other passengers around her. Most of them were talking in hushed tones, dressed in high-end suits and designer clothing. Despite the luxury around her, she remained focused on the book in her hands, minding her own business, as she always did when flying. A few moments later, a flight attendant, Caitlin, walked down the aisle, her sharp eyes scanning the passengers as she made her way toward the front of the plane. Caitlin's smile was polished, but there was an air of arrogance about her, an unmistakable sense of entitlement that came with years of working in first class. When she reached Maya's row, she glanced at the seat assignment and raised an eyebrow. Caitlin, snapping. "Excuse me, miss. I'm going to need you to move to a different seat." Maya blinked in confusion. Maya, politely. "I'm sorry, is there a problem with my seat?" Caitlin, dismissively. "I don't think you understand. You don't belong here. You should be in the back with the other passengers." Maya was taken aback, her brow furrowing as she processed what Caitlin had just said. She had never been one to let her family's wealth define her, but she also wasn't about to tolerate being treated like this. Maya, calmly. "I believe my ticket says 1A. This is my seat." Caitlin sneered and crossed her arms over her chest. Caitlin, condescendingly. "Yeah, well, people like you don't usually fly in first class. Move. Now." Maya's stomach churned. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, but she refused to back down. She was just about to speak up when Caitlin stepped away, looking to call over another crew member. Caitlin, loudly. "I'm going to have to call security. You're not following the rules." Before Maya could even respond, Caitlin turned her back on her and started walking down the aisle to the front of the plane. The entire cabin seemed to go quiet as passengers looked around, some whispering among themselves. Maya clenched her fists in frustration. How could anyone make such a snap judgment based on her appearance? She had always felt proud of who she was and where she came from, but now, here she was, being treated like a second-class citizen. The plane's captain came over the intercom, announcing that they would be delaying takeoff for a moment as a passenger issue needed to be addressed. Maya sighed deeply. The situation was only getting worse. A few minutes passed, and soon enough, a security officer arrived at the gate, walking down the aisle toward Maya. He looked around, seeing the flight attendant's stern face, and then turned his gaze toward Maya. Maya, standing her ground. "I'm not going anywhere." The officer raised an eyebrow, glancing at the flight attendant and back to Maya. Security officer. "Ma'am, we have a situation here. You'll need to exit the plane." Maya, shaking her head. "No, I'm not going anywhere. This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong." The officer glanced back at Caitlin, who was smirking with satisfaction, but then he saw something shift in Maya's demeanor. There was something about her, something confident but grounded, that told him there was more to this than met the eye. The officer looked at her for a long moment before sighing. Security officer. "Hold on. Let me make a quick call." As the officer stepped away to make a call, Caitlin stood nearby, arms crossed and satisfied that her problem would soon be handled. What she didn't know, however, was that Maya wasn't just some random passenger. Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she sat frozen, the weight of Karen's words sinking in. How could someone so brazenly accuse her of not belonging? She had done nothing wrong, nothing at all, but somehow, in that moment, she felt smaller than she ever had before. "Please don't make this difficult," Karen said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. She didn't even seem to care about Maya's dignity. She just wanted to be rid of her. Maya stood up slowly, her breath catching as she fought the tears threatening to fall. She felt the eyes of the passengers boring into her, and every whisper and every glance made her want to disappear. But she wasn't going to let Karen see her falter. She wasn't going to let anyone make her feel like she didn't belong. "I'm not moving," Maya said firmly, her voice stronger than she felt. "You can call whoever you want. I'm staying right here. Karen crossed her arms, clearly frustrated. You don't want to make this harder for yourself. Maya's gaze met the flight attendant's, unwavering. I'm not the one making this hard. Karen smirked, clearly confident that she had the upper hand. She walked away with a huff, heading toward the front of the cabin to speak with the captain and call security. Maya stayed in her seat, trying to block out the uncomfortable stares from the other passengers. She knew that they were judging her. She could feel their eyes on her, whispers about her appearance, about whether she deserved to be in first class or not. It was an invisible weight, but it pressed down on her nonetheless. She pulled her sweater tighter around her, trying to hide the sense of vulnerability creeping in. Her palms were clammy, but she didn't dare wipe them on her clothes. There was no way she was going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her crack. She had already dealt with enough in her life. This was just one more hurdle, and she wasn't going to let it beat her. It wasn't long before the security officer arrived. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man, his uniform sharp and crisp. His stern face softened slightly when he saw her sitting there, but Maya could tell he wasn't on her side. He was just doing his job. Ma'am, you'll need to come with me, he said, his tone neutral. Maya opened her mouth to protest, but before she could speak, Karen returned with a satisfied look on her face. She spoke with the officer, her words cutting through the air like daggers, painting Maya as a troublemaker. She's causing a disturbance, Karen said, her voice dripping with disdain. I've tried to be polite, but she refuses to listen. The officer turned to Maya, clearly disinterested in hearing her side. Please come with me. But before Maya could stand, a voice cut through the tension, a voice so calm and steady that it stopped everyone in their tracks. Is there a problem here? The entire cabin fell silent. Everyone turned to look at the man who had just spoken. He was dressed in a tailored suit, exuding an air of authority that immediately commanded attention. Maya's heart skipped a beat as recognition flickered in her mind. It was him, Daniel Sterling, the billionaire who owned Sterling Airlines. She had seen his face on the news countless times. He was tall, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to pierce straight through you. As he walked toward them, the entire plane seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Sterling, this woman, Karen began, but he cut her off with a sharp look. Ms. Matthews, he said, addressing the flight attendant by name. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. Karen's face turned pale, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. I don't understand, sir, she stammered. Daniel's gaze didn't waver as he locked eyes with Maya. He smiled slightly, nodding in acknowledgement. Maya Carter, I believe, he said. I'm familiar with your work. Maya blinked in surprise, wondering how he could possibly know her. Yes, that's me. Daniel turned back to Karen, who was still standing frozen in place. Ms. Matthews, he repeated, his voice cold and firm. I think it's time you realized who belongs where on this plane. The flight attendant's face flushed with embarrassment as she realized her mistake. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Daniel turned back to Maya, his expression softening. You're not going anywhere, Maya, he said, his voice warm and reassuring. You belong here, and I won't let anyone make you feel otherwise. The officer, who had been silent during the exchange, stepped back, his face red with shame. He seemed to recognize who Daniel was, but it was too late. He had already been swept up in the billionaire's wake. Maya sat back down, her heart pounding in her chest, but this time for a different reason. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The plane was still quiet, the weight of the situation hanging in the air. But then, to her surprise, Daniel smiled at her and said something that completely changed the course of her life. Ms. Carter, he said, how would you like to have dinner with me tonight? I'd love to talk about your future. Maya blinked, stunned by the offer. What was going on? How could this man, this billionaire, even know about her? Daniel looked at her with a hint of understanding. You've earned this moment. Don't let anyone take it from you. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, Maya's mind raced. She had no idea what was about to happen, but one thing was clear. Her life was about to change forever. Just as Maya stepped onto the tarmac, she saw a sleek black car pull up next to the plane. The doors opened, and out stepped none other than Daniel Sterling, the billionaire owner of the airline. His confident stride caught the attention of everyone on the runway. Maya froze in disbelief. How could he be here? Why was he stepping out of a car? Daniel looked directly at her, his expression calm yet commanding. Maya, he called out, and his voice echoed across the quiet tarmac. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure if she had heard him correctly. Mr. Sterling? She stammered. He nodded. Come with me, please. Before Maya could process what was happening, Daniel's bodyguard escorted her toward the car. He gave Karen and the airline officer a look that made them step back in hesitation, as if they knew what was coming. Get in, Daniel said. As Maya climbed into the back of the black car, she still couldn't believe what was happening. The humiliation she had just endured felt like a distant memory, replaced by the strange sensation of being treated with dignity and respect by one of the wealthiest men in the world. Mr. Sterling, I don't understand, Maya managed to say as the car drove off. Daniel looked over at her, his sharp eyes filled with quiet strength. You shouldn't have been treated that way, Maya. You deserve better. Maya shook her head, still processing the chaos of the past few minutes. But I don't get it. Why did you come out there for me? Why do you care? Daniel smiled, though it wasn't one of those superficial smiles he reserved for media appearances. It was genuine, understanding. I care because I saw something in you, Maya. I saw courage, strength, and grace under pressure. Something tells me you've dealt with this kind of treatment before. I couldn't let it go unnoticed. Maya looked out the window, trying to hide the tears welling up in her eyes. She had never been shown kindness like this before, especially not from someone of his stature. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't want this moment to be a fleeting one. Mr. Sterling, she said softly, her voice full of gratitude, you've really changed my life. Daniel chuckled, the sound warm and deep. It's not just me, Maya. You have all the potential in the world. I've already made a call to my assistant. Maya turned to face him, confused. A call? To get you back on that plane, he replied with a wink. But this time, in first class, no one should have the power to make you feel inferior, especially not a flight attendant who's out of line. Maya smiled for the first time in hours. You're serious? Absolutely, Daniel said. And you're not just going back to the plane. You're going to join me in the lounge, where I'll introduce you to some people who can help you build the future you deserve. Maya couldn't believe what she was hearing. She was no longer just the girl who was humiliated on a plane. She was the girl who was now being given an opportunity to rise above the labels and limits others had placed on her. As the car pulled into the private jet hangar, Maya's mind raced. She was being given a chance to change her life, and all it took was a moment of humanity and a twist of fate. The world she had once felt excluded from was now within her reach. The door opened, and Maya followed Daniel Sterling inside, ready to face her new future. Maya felt a mix of disbelief and determination flood through her as she ended the call with her father. She leaned back into the plush chair of the VIP lounge, trying to calm her breathing. In just a few minutes, her life had been turned upside down, twice. First, by the humiliation of being thrown off the flight. Then, by Daniel Sterling's unexpected kindness. But now, with her father on the case, something in her clicked. She wasn't just a victim. She was a force to be reckoned with. 7 minutes. It felt like an eternity. Maya stared at her phone, waiting for the inevitable. Her thoughts swirled around Karen and the way she'd acted. The unjust treatment, the disgusting dismissal of Maya's presence in first class, it all came rushing back. Karen had assumed she was out of place. She had assumed that because of her appearance, her skin, her humble attire, that Maya didn't belong in a seat meant for the rich and elite. And for what? For trying to enjoy a flight she had every right to be on? 7 minutes. Maya's leg bounced nervously, the anticipation eating away at her. She thought back to the words Daniel had said. "You have all the potential in the world." She clung to those words as the minutes ticked by, remembering how Karen had humiliated her with the swipe of a hand. But Maya wasn't going to let that define her, not anymore. The door to the lounge opened. Maya looked up, half expecting Daniel to return and offer her yet another act of kindness. But instead, a group of men in dark suits walked in, their presence immediately commanding attention. The first person Maya recognized was her father. He entered the room like a man on a mission. The group with him, 3 lawyers and an associate, followed suit, all moving with the precision and confidence of people used to getting things done. Maya's heart pounded as her father approached. "Maya," he greeted her, his tone calm but stern. "You okay?" She nodded, trying to mask the intensity of her emotions. "Yeah, just processing everything." He placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing it gently. "You did nothing wrong. Don't let this situation define you." Maya felt a wave of emotion swell up in her chest. All the anger she'd kept buried for so long surged to the surface, but her father's calm presence helped ground her. "Dad," Maya said, the words coming out sharp and clear. It wasn't just about the flight. It was about how they saw me, how they saw us, like we didn't belong. Her father's eyes narrowed slightly. "We're going to change that." And just like that, the plan was set in motion. The group of lawyers spread out, some heading toward the airline's legal team, while others began making phone calls. Her father was a billionaire tech mogul, but his influence reached far beyond that. He had connections that could dismantle the arrogance of one small flight attendant in no time. 7 minutes, remember? Maya asked, finally feeling like things were starting to turn in her favor. Her father's lips twitched into a faint smile. 7 minutes was all it took to get the wheels turning. The real change is coming. The phone rang, and Maya's father picked it up without hesitation. "Maya, sit tight," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. "This is just the beginning." The next few minutes passed in a blur. Maya could see the shift in the room. There was no more waiting, no more worrying. Her father had taken control of the situation, and now she was about to be part of something much bigger than herself. And then, as if on cue, another call came through. Her father's expression darkened as he listened intently. After a brief conversation, he placed the phone down with a quiet sigh. "Maya," he said softly, "you've just become the face of a movement." Her eyebrows shot up. "A movement?" "Exactly," he said. "We're going public with this. We're making sure everyone knows what happened today. Karen's behavior is going to be exposed, and we're going to ensure that this airline understands how serious we are." Maya looked up at her father, stunned. This wasn't just about getting an apology. It was about taking a stand. It was about making sure that no one would ever feel the sting of discrimination again. The plane's engines roared back to life as the crew worked swiftly to prepare for takeoff. But the atmosphere in the cabin had changed completely. The tension that had hung thick in the air moments ago had dissipated, replaced by an energy that was electric with satisfaction. Passengers whispered excitedly to one another, many of them still processing what they had just witnessed. Maya sat back in her seat, her hands resting in her lap, her expression calm. Her eyes briefly met her father's across the aisle, and she smiled. There was no anger in her now, just quiet triumph. Karen Matthews, the woman who had humiliated her, had been escorted off the plane like the garbage she had treated Maya as earlier, But it wasn't just about getting revenge, it was about standing up for herself and for anyone who had been belittled, overlooked, or underestimated because of who they were. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Maya thought about the journey ahead. She had always dreamed big, but her life had just taken a major turn. What had started as a normal flight had become something entirely different. Her father's words echoed in her mind. This is just the beginning. Maya knew the future had just been paved in front of her. Her father was a billionaire, yes, but it wasn't his money that had helped her. It was his belief in her that gave her the power to take charge of her life. As the plane took off, ascending through the clouds, Maya settled into the feeling of empowerment. The horizon stretched out before her, endless and full of opportunity. It wasn't just about the money or the status. Maya wasn't just going to fly first class anymore. She was going to own the skies.